When most people die, they plan for a traditional funeral and burial. But for some, death is an opportunity to make a last memorable statement about their life. On this special episode of The Will, we'll take a look at those thinking outside the box, so to speak, by pushing the limits and making some very outrageous final wishes.
Once you're dead, you're a problem that's got to be taken care of ASAP. We can't just leave you in the room there. So we got to do something with you.
People are more educated nowadays. They know what's going on through the internet and television and travel, and they like to be creative. At some point, people may start to try to outdo one another with more and more bizarre death rites.
People's wants are getting wild and different. But this is one industry you gotta take serious. It's not a do-it-yourself industry.
As the world evolves, the law must evolve with it. Without catching up, lawyers like me are gonna begin lots of work.
While some are requesting more bizarre funerals, others are more interested in simply saving some cash. They are choosing to buy the least expensive caskets, made out of everything from cardboard, wicker, or even 100% recycled newspaper. A few prefer a more exotic farewell, like the ancient Filipino tradition of being hung from a mountain cliff, or the Native American ritual of being propped on a platform or in a treetop. And a rare few opt for bizarre ways to dispose of their bodies as a final singular expression of their life's passion. Like Pringle can potato chip inventor Dr. Frederick J. Bauer, who requested that his ashes be put into a Pringles can. Not to be outdone, Doritos creator Arch West was so enamored with his chips, he decided to cover himself with them as a last tribute.
A will literally means you will it to happen. Many people use it as a way to get back at somebody else, or they want attention. Just make sure that your will is something that truly can be done, and that your will is truly your will. I will it to be.
In life, the rich and famous are used to getting what they want. But what about in death? Can money and power make a statement from the grave? The answer is yes. Some secure their fortunes by adding a poisonous clause. Before he died, childhood actor and Hollywood legend Jackie Cooper wanted to make sure that nobody questioned his last will and testament. He wrote a special provision that would prevent anyone from challenging his final wishes. Cooper willed everything to his wife, but because she died before him, the estate became divided equally between their children. To prevent the kids from fighting over the money, Cooper added a clause called a poison pill. It stated, "If anyone tries to contest the will, I give to such person so contesting or objecting the sum of $5 and no more."
I love the poison pill clause because it allows people to clearly say, "Don't touch my will."
When people are writing their wills, they know generally who the beneficiaries will be. And so they know the animals who are on the other side of the table. If you contest the will for any reason, the most amount of money you'll get is X. That's it. End game. Game, set, match. Over.
It's that fantastic because you stop greed dead in its tracks.
It worked like a charm. There have been no recorded family disputes over Jackie Cooper's considerable estate to this day. You can't take it with you, but sometimes the well-to-do try to ensure they're not forgotten after death. Regulars at the Metropolitan Opera in New York City knew McNair Ilgen Fritz only as a man who regularly rented box number 1. Music was a passion for Ilgen Fritz, and with income from his real estate holdings, he was free to compose himself. However, he never managed to have any of his pieces produced by a reputable opera house, which was a bit of a sore spot.
Well, I think that the point about McNair that shouldn't be forgotten is that he stunk as an opera composer to begin with. He was a good real estate tycoon, and for that I give him all the credit in the world. But as an opera composer, he's a complete unknown.
As the years passed, he wrote a dozen compositions, each on a grander scale than the last.
His pieces became more ambitious, to the point where he had ballerinas dancing around with pink chiffon with rose petals strewn about. What are you going to do with that?
In 1953, at the age of 66, composer Ilgen Fritz died before any of his operas were seen by the Met's audience. Nevertheless, he saw to it that the opera would never forget them.
He left the Met most of his estate of $150,000. That was a lot of money at the time. The only condition was that they would have to perform one of his operas.
The problem with his music is that it was considered turgid and inconsequential. It's very hard and no one's going to take it then.
Well, sometimes money will stoke the fire and take a complete unknown and push him into stardom. Maybe that's what McNair was thinking.
While the financially strapped Metropolitan Opera would only have to perform it once to get the money, the decision was made to decline the offer for fear of degrading the arts. However, those left in charge of the estate were tasked with the mission to have some orchestra perform Ilgen Fritz's pieces.
They had a list of 20 orchestras to present this offer to, and for years they traveled the world trying to find one that would perform his pieces. None of them accepted because they did not want to insult their patrons or audiences with such a ridiculous work.
Ilgen Fritz stipulated that if no opera agreed within 2 years to produce his music, his entire estate should be used for the advertising of his unpublished operas.
Some people are overachievers, and if they don't make it in life, they're gonna use their wills to try to at least make it in death. Even if I'm dead, they'll know my name.
Money talks. We all know that. So if someone wants to make themselves more special after death and they've got the money to back it, I think there's someone willing out there to take a bite on it. So I gotta give the guy credit.
After 20 years of traveling the world and being turned down by every opera they approached, the executors made one last offer to the Newport Art Museum Orchestra, and they accepted. In 1977, the Newport Art Museum performed Ilgen Fritz's rejected works and used the money to build a large wing to the museum called the Ilgen Fritz Gallery. Needless to say, Ilgen Fritz's music did not stand the test of time, although the $150,000 did buy him 15 glorious minutes of post-mortem fame.
So, actually, money can buy you love.
For some, death may be their greatest performance of all. '80s British pop star and actress Toya Wilcox has a bizarre scenario planned for her funeral.
My funeral has to be on the same level as Ben-Hur. It's got to be that big. Having control of your remains is the last rebellious move you make.
Known for trailblazing new sounds and visuals in the pop music universe, she topped the charts in the 80s with hit albums like Anthem and Changeling. She plans on breaking new ground with her funeral as well. No part of this plan involves her going quietly.
The first part of my ceremony is incredibly visual and quite traditional. I want it to be in a massive abbey. The larger, the better. I want a lot of people there. But when people walk in, I want there to be a mega-sized picture of me, of how I looked in 1982. I'm talking about an egotistical megalomaniac send-off. There would be videos playing, but they play silently because I'd like classical music to be underneath them. So you would have the video to Brave New World, which is quite surreal. It's me on a white horse, charging through an empty power station. Slowly Iggy Pop will be performing Lust for Life, and then ideally David Bowie would get up and sing Rock and Roll Suicide. And it goes without saying that David Bowie has to be chained to the altar. Even my great friend Bill Rieflin, I would like to have in the coffin with me because of all that he's put me through in our career together.
But Toya's longtime musical collaborator and good friend isn't entirely convinced of her plan.
It wasn't actually terribly surprising. Coming from Toya, let's say that I'll keep an open mind. However, just because it's her final wishes doesn't mean it's any different from any other wish. Well, I'm not worried about much. I'm not legally obliged to do anything.
What a bunch of brats.
I want Peter Gabriel to come to my funeral too and sing something in Hebrew. That would be nice to be a guest, Justin Giro. No, take the extra step. Please be chained to my altar.
Well, it's fine to have all these plans, but then you have to have cooperation also. You know, if David Bowie doesn't want to be chained to her altar while he's performing, it's just not going to happen. I don't think she's going to be able to pull this one off.
And this is only the beginning. The next part of the ceremony involves a burial from another time and place. A burial that is not only outside of social norms, but also outside the law.
The meaning of a sky burial is relatively simple. It's lifting the soul up to the higher plane. They have what's called a body breaker, who breaks the body down on a sacred rock with a monk chanting, mourning, and praying for the purity of the soul. They mix the body parts with flour and feed it to the vultures. For this to happen in the Western world and for where I live, I would have to be secretly taken away by someone who knows what they're doing. You'd be instantly breaking the law to do it, so it would have to be done secretly and in the dark of night and timed for the sun rising.
I like how passionate she is, but pulverizing her body and feeding her to a bird to express this, it's a little out there. And legally, we're gonna have a problem trying to do it.
There's no jurisdiction in the world that's going to allow her body to be pulverized and cut into little pieces and fed to the birds. If it happens anywhere, it's going to be in Uzbekistan at 6 o'clock in the morning with no one around.
There's also one other small problem. Exactly who will volunteer to dismember her body?
There is absolutely no way my husband, as a vegetarian, would carry out this job himself. He probably couldn't even look at it. Bill's an interesting one, because I think Bill would actually like to murder me.
If she needs someone to dismember, disassemble, and pulverize her lifeless corpse, there might be lots of people lining up to do that. I don't know that I will, but you know, give me a couple of drinks and who knows.
Sometimes final wishes are simply too much for the living. What happens with requests so audacious, survivors have no intention of honoring them?
You can't stop people from building a statue of you and putting your body in Westminster Abbey.
Some have their final request ignored because they were just too famous in life. When he died in 1870, English novelist Charles Dickens requested that mourners that attend his funeral wear no scarf, cloak, black bow, long hatband, or other such revolting absurdity. In addition, Dickens also wrote that he wanted a private funeral, to be buried at his local church, and he did not want the book he wrote for his children to be published. Despite his wishes, his celebrity dictated something more grand. He was buried in Westminster Abbey with thousands of mourners attending the national ceremony, and his book, Life of Our Lord, was published in 1917.
He wished for a subtle, calm, quiet, and especially humble ceremony. Charles Dickens, a man of words, whose final words didn't mean anything.
I mean, if I'm Charles Dickens right now, I'm rolling in my grave, furious underneath some big piece of stone in Westminster Abbey saying, I never wanted to be here.
I think it's very humble of him to request what he wanted, which was next to nothing. But when you're a legend, I don't know how you can get away with doing nothing when you die.
It's the living that dispose of bodies, and if they want to build a statue, even though you didn't want it, they want it, so they're going to go ahead and do it, and there's nothing you can do about it because you're dead.
There are hundreds of monuments and statues all over the world for him. And to top it off, his descendants have decided they want to build one more to commemorate his 200th anniversary.
In death, you don't really have a lot of say on what others want to do, especially if it's legal.
It works both ways. Some make these outrageous things, and then there's other people that just want to go quietly, but yet they're not allowed to go quietly because they're famous.
He wasn't just famous, he was adored. I guess when you're Charles Dickens, you can't stop people from building a statue of you and putting your body in Westminster Abbey.
Sometimes, final wishes are disregarded entirely, with gruesome consequences. Edward Beaupre was born a giant in 1881. By the time he was an adult, he was a towering 8 feet 2 inches tall. He got his start in show business when a neighbor suggested it might be a good way to earn money. In no time, Beaupre had an agent and jobs touring with the circus.
He was performing feats of strength, lifting heavy things, the typical thing that you'd think a giant would do. I hear that he would just bend down underneath a standing horse and just literally lift him off its feet. And I think just looking at him was reason enough to pay the price to get in just to see him.
He spent several years being pushed to his physical limits with the strongman act before falling gravely ill. It was unfortunately at that moment he received the offer that he'd been waiting for.
When he heard that he was employed to go to St. Louis for the World's Fair, of course he wanted to go. This was an opportunity of a lifetime for him.
Unfortunately, this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity would take a tragic turn. At the young age of 25, Edward, the giant of Beaupre, died of tuberculosis thousands of miles away from home. The planning and expense involved in returning Beaupre's body to Willow Bunch led to a great deal of confusion.
The manager of the fair notified Edward's manager that Edward had passed away. Edward's manager told Edward's father that the railroad in St. Louis was requesting double fare to bring the body back, and it would have to be accompanied. That meant that the father or someone else would have to go down to get the body. But what he didn't tell him was that the St. Louis World's Fair had offered to pay for the transportation of the body back home.
The family began to question the motivations of the manager when a mysterious announcement appeared in the Winnipeg Free Press. Someone had told the paper that the most extraordinary desire of this abnormal man was that at his decease, his body should be embalmed and exhibited.
Was that the manager's idea, or was someone from St. Louis? It's impossible to tell. At that time, it wasn't that uncommon for a circus to have a body idea. I mean, it would have certainly been an extraordinary body to show in a sideshow.
The Beaupre giant's problem was that he died in a circus. Circus people are, after all, circus people, and so he had a circus post-mortem.
You can't just parade a cadaver around for profit. It's just wrong. The correct thing to do would have been to release or ship the body back to his family or whoever was the next of kin.
Edward Beaupre's body ended up displayed in exhibits and touring with various circuses for many years.
This flies in the face of law because none of the people who used his body had authority. He was exploited not just in life, but in death for his rare genetic disorder.
At one point, the body, which was embalmed, was simply abandoned and found by children in a Montreal warehouse. Dr. Louis Napoleon Delorme from the University of Montreal, hearing tales of the giant, decided to purchase the cadaver for $20 from the morgue that was storing the body.
He thought that he would expose the body just as an illustration that growth can go wrong. But the body was strictly kept in the anatomy lab, and only medical students were allowed in the anatomy lab. So,
for many years, the body remained safely out of sight. but then it was moved to a library exhibit where it was put on display once again.
At that point, they had put him in a glass case, and he was completely naked. Anyone who went to the University of Montreal and took a tour could come across Edward. He was a curiosity.
After hearing stories of the display, the Beaupre family realized the body was in Montreal and went to investigate. They discovered Beaupre's naked body propped up in the exhibit.
They were appalled to see him being exposed like that. They said it was disrespectful, and at that point, they knew they couldn't get the body back.
University of Montreal claimed that they said, well, we've been having the body long enough that it's now ours. Law can confirm this.
They said, at least cover him up and take him out of the public view. It's not respectful. And the university conceded that.
The body was then removed and stored in a wing in the anatomy department that was barely used. 3 decades later, the giant's nephew, Ovila L'Esperance, attempted once again to retrieve the body so that he could finally be laid to rest in Willow Bunch.
Dr. Messier implied that maybe it was time for the family to get the body under certain conditions. And one of them would be cremation. We would not get the body, we would get ashes. We thought it was the perfect solution. We were concerned that if we were burying Edward's body, that someone could come along, dig him up, and we'd lose him forever.
His remains were sent back to Willow Bunch, where the giant is now finally resting in peace.
On the day of the funeral over there was a crowd. Somebody actually said, well, finally, Edward, you're back home. I think that was a nice way of putting it, you know.
To us, it was just like the ending of a long, long drawn-out affair. And I think that, yes, if he is somewhere looking down, he would be happy to be back home.
Next, 2 wills that put the living to the test with some outrageous conditions.
There are a lot of crazy people out there who truly believe that they are Jesus.
All he was doing was a funny will, and I'm not sure if he really thought this through.
Some prefer to spend their money to ensure a good standing in the afterlife. Norman Ernest Digweed was either extremely devout or missing a couple of marbles. He left $47,000 to Jesus back in the late 70s. Jesus had 100 years to show up and claim the money, or it all went to the state.
Instructions were given that the money should be invested in government bonds, meaning that if the Lord shows up at the agreed drop time, he'd reap in $600,000. Right away, there were problems because, shocker, more than one Jesus showed up to claim the prize. But I suppose that's good news because it does mean that there are a lot more saviors out there than we thought.
All people who think they're Jesus, raise their hands, and I will give you money. If you posted this one up on Facebook, I promise you that you would be getting more than 1 million hits in less than 1 minute. There are a lot of crazy people out there who truly believe that they are Jesus.
There's no risk to leaving your money to Jesus. Jesus is not going to claim the money. That money's just going to get tied up for, 100 years, and then it's going to go to the state. You would hope that these people didn't bitch about paying taxes because now that they're dead, they paid a $47,000 voluntary tax to the state.
I think money's meant to be used. Leave it to someone that can use it right away and to get good use out of it.
Others seem to get satisfaction by instigating a childish fight over their estate. Successful lawyer and bachelor Charles Vance Miller died in 1926, and soon after, some of the most notorious clauses ever found in a will were revealed. When he died, he bequeathed a great final prank on the world.
I have never heard of a will even remotely similar to this. He gave a house in Jamaica to 3 of his friends he knew couldn't stand each other. He also gave stocks in brewery companies to Protestant ministers, and these Protestant ministers lined up religiously to cash in on their stocks, and this in the middle of the Prohibition.
The most infamous of his bequests was the Great Stork Derby contest, whereby women in Toronto had to compete to produce the most babies in 10 years between 1926 and 1936 in order to qualify for a prize of $500,000.
The goal of the Stork Derby was to see who could have the most children at that period of time. And whoever had the most children won the money. I don't find that funny or witty or kind.
When the Timlick family found out about the Derby, they saw it as the opportunity of a lifetime.
A lot of women had kids just for the Derby. In the 30s, you were lucky to make $2 or $3 a week. And that kind of temptation is just, you can't help it but try. My grandparents were fairly quiet, hardworking people. They weren't out seeking attention or anything else like that. I mean, they were going to have these kids, maybe not quite as many as they had, but they were still going to have kids.
While the Timlick family was a real contender with 8 kids in 1934, the Nagel family gave them a run for their money with the timely arrival of their 9th child in 1935.
In those days, 10 kids was not out of the question. My grandmother was fortunate enough to have 15 children, 2 before the Derby, and then 3 more followed the Derby.
My grandmother was Lucy Alice Timlick. I kept hearing rumors of like 20 kids and stuff, but I believe it was like 18 by the final number. And I remember they had to go through a big thing at the end of it. It was pretty much a fight to see who was going to get the money at the end.
Even though written by a lawyer, deciphering the meaning of the mischievous clauses would prove to be no easy task. Everything was deliberated.
Are these legitimate children? Are they out of wedlock children? So the first court battle was about that, and that determined that they had to be children who were born within marriage. After that, it became a matter of the birth record. Does the birth record clearly identify the mother? And then there was the exact period of time. What if a child is conceived within the 10-year time but born outside of it? It just created a whole bunch of legal issues that all had to be resolved by all of the courts of Canada, starting from the lowest level of courts in Ontario, working its way right up to the Grand Supreme Court of Canada based in Ottawa.
The case that ensued was marked by years of drama and court challenges. The contest had its favorites, challengers, and frontrunners. There were a total of 14 families vying for the top prize, with 120 children amongst them. It was the sensational story of the decade in Toronto and was being played out in the media for everyone's amusement.
People followed it, were cheering for various families, and there was constant updates in the paper. Families that were expecting any new contenders that would emerge. It was almost as if they were describing a horse race to a degree.
The media just took it as like a curiosity, kind of a joke. My family didn't take it as it was a circus or a freak show or anything else. They took it very seriously. It was a chance for them to get ahead, and that was it.
What I find particularly distressing is what happened to all of the children who were born in anticipation of the money being available to raise them in the midst of the Great Depression. All he was doing was a funny will, and I'm not sure if he really thought this through.
Charles Vance Miller's will went through 10 years of litigation. It endured attempts made by the Supreme Court of Canada to have it thrown out for moral reasons, and challenges by distant Miller relatives who wanted the money. The only certainty in this case were the legal bills.
And once it gets into litigation, and especially once they're fighting over it, that's when the estate really shrinks. Who actually won on the case was the lawyers who litigated it for 10 years.
Despite all the lawyers, there was still a considerable amount of money left for the winning families. In the end, the majority of the $750,000 prize was divided up between the 4 front-runners, which included the Nagel and Timlick families with 9 children each in the 10-year time period.
My grandmother was awarded $125,000 as a co-winner of the Stork Derby. And I believe that would be equivalent to about $2 million in today's funds. It was like a 360-degree turn in their life.
Actually own a home instead of rent a home. They bought some businesses, hotels, general stores, and they just got to enjoy their life. They didn't go out and flaunt their money in front of everybody or rub it in everybody's face. They were just, lived like normal people. But it just got easier for them.
I remember at an early age, my mom telling us our grandparents had been lucky enough to win a contest. She cautioned us throughout our lives that we weren't to tell anyone. She was a little bit paranoid that we might be kidnapped or held for extortion because we were descendants of the Nagel fortune. This was a story for our family that was stranger than fiction. You could never write this story.
Next up, some last requests that give new meaning to the idea of resting in peace and comfort.
It was like a joke almost. You know, Johnny, when you die, we're burying you with your cell phone so you can call everybody every morning.
While some like to give their money away after they die, others prefer to keep it all to themselves, sometimes in extravagant ways. John Bowman, who made his fortune in the late 1800s as a tanner in Vermont, was predeceased by his wife and 2 daughters. He became convinced that after his death in 1891, the family would be reincarnated together.
He didn't just believe about souls coming together. He believed about them physically coming home. The 22-room mansion was to be upkept, along with a dinner prepared on a date and time certain by his staff.
Bowman's will stated that supper was to be served every evening in case the Bowmans came back on an empty stomach. Dinners were made until the large supper trust was depleted in 1950.
So someone's got to go through all the work of preparing all these meals that no one's going to eat. You know what happened. They were just eating it themselves, having the leftovers.
In fact, it would add up to about $50,000 of unclaimed food over the course of 59 years. That's roughly $1.3 million in today's money.
That's a lot of money to put out there for fancy dinners night after night. I would have liked to work there, get free meals.
Maybe the executor ate there every night. You know, I don't know who ate this food. All I know it was put out there because of the rigid requirements of her will, and it was a complete waste of money and food. Probably with homeless people walking around down below his apartment building. Nobody knows that this idiot's money is being put on a table for no one to consume. For how long? Until all the money was gone.
While the money for dinner ran out after about a half-century, Bowman's mausoleum still stands to this day as a testament to post-mortem extravagance, replete with a large room filled with statues and busts.
You can dedicate, spend, pay, fritter away your money any way you want to. Luckily for John Bowman, there's no law against spending your money in a ridiculous fashion.
Saying goodbye to loved ones is never easy, so some will go to great lengths to reach out and touch the deceased. We bring them on the bus, to dinner, and even to bed. But lately we've started taking our gadgets someplace really unexpected. The funeral industry is reporting a bizarre new trend where more and more people under the age of 40 are requesting to be buried with their favorite tech device. When Manhattan criminal defense attorney John Jacobs died in 2005, his wife buried him with his phone and a fully charged battery.
Well, Johnny, he was one of these people who every morning would check in with every one of his friends. There were a whole number of people, you know, throughout New York City who every morning would sort of wake up to Johnny's, hi, you know, good morning, goodbye, I gotta go. The cell phone really came into existence probably between 5 and 10 years before he died. And that was like a bonanza. That was the most wonderful thing that could have ever happened to Johnny.
Every time he would go anywhere, if he didn't have a cell phone, he was naked. It was either work or just a conversation about the Yankees or something along those lines, but he never ever put it down.
It was like a joke almost. You know, Johnny, when you die, we're burying you with your cell phone so you can call everybody every morning.
When John died tragically of pancreatic cancer, his family was overwhelmed with all the burial choices.
You want this casket, you want that casket, and what color, and what this, and what that, and flowers. And then ultimately they said, well, is there anything you want to bury with your husband? And of course, all of us simultaneously go, the cell phone.
Honestly, it was so spontaneous. Every time I saw him sleeping, he had his phones resting on his chest. We had an open casket, and so I just walked up and I set it right in there, and I felt kind of like liberating almost.
People are always choosing unique things to go to the grave with them. Sometimes they write it down. Hey, don't take my cell phone away. Leave it in my pocket. I think it's just gonna happen more and more, especially because the price of cell phone contracts are so inexpensive.
You know, I don't think that's anything new. I mean, look at the ancient Egyptians. They used to be buried with everything they thought they were gonna need in the afterlife. I guess humans have been wanting to do that 5,000, 6,000 years. Bury me with my stuff. I just don't know how you get the thing charged.
Simon not only buried his dad with his favorite gadget, but he decided to take it one step further.
The cemetery workers are lowering the casket into the ground, and everyone's sobbing and crying. And Simon dials the number on the cell phone from his cell phone, and the casket's going down, and the phone rings.
Everyone was so confused, looking around like the guys who were dropping the casket, everyone just couldn't understand what was going on. I thought it was hilarious. I really did.
Well, I think everyone's first reaction is, this is terribly bad taste. You know, somebody forgot to turn off their cell phone. But then I think when everyone realized what was actually happening, I think everybody appreciated the fact. Everybody realized, you know, that was Johnny.
Marion made sure Johnny's number was not going to be forgotten.
A year later, when it got to the point when I went to pick out a tombstone, I figured, let's put the cell phone number on the tombstone. And so it's Johnny Jacobs, date of birth, you know, date of death, rest in peace, and 917-685. Some people think it's weird, but I think he would have liked it.
Family, friends, old rivals, and even strangers who see the number on the tombstone give it a ring. And of course, Marion likes to drop him a line now and again.
What she's really doing is calling a corpse. I mean, she's just calling a phone that's buried in a casket. He's not going to answer it.
I think it's a bit creepy to call a dead person, but I think it'd be even creepier if the dead person answered. John, I thought you were dead. Well, I am dead, but you woke me up, so what do you want?
I think it's a unique way to stay connected to that person. People find value in that makes them feel good. It reminds them of the person, it remembers. And it is such a personal thing, it is their voice.
People have different ways of remembering those who they have loved and have died. It's a real experience, and it's a real memory to dial the number and hear the person's voice sounding exactly as it had for all those years.
Hi, you've reached the voicemail of John Jacobs. And if you have a beep, leave a message and I'll return your call.
It's pretty much the only recording of his voice I have. I call him on Father's Day, I call him when I'm having a hard time, whenever I need to.
You know, people pray, they go to church, they go wherever, you know, to talk to somebody when they have something happy or something sad to say, or some news. And it's the same thing, really. But when it sounds like there's a voice at the end, it makes it very meaningful. At least for me it does. And I think for others, too, who were close to him.
To some, these small extravagances give them a great peace of mind. But for others, finding a good bargain, even in death, is essential.
It's a piece of furniture, and then it's going to be Katie's coffin.
Some people are shocked at the price of a funeral and have figured out incredible new ways to get their money's worth by putting their coffin to good use during life. By adding some wheels, you can use it to carry an extra load. You can even add a motor and take it for a spin around the neighborhood. It can come in handy if you need something to get around in before the time comes. Castlegar, BC native Katie Kabatoff believes in the incredible potential of the casket and has discovered an astonishing new use for it.
What do you envision when somebody says to you, I have a casket in my dining room? First of all, I don't think they see it as it's standing up as a curio cabinet. It's a piece of furniture, and then it's going to be Katie's coffin. Well, it is a bit of a crazy idea, but because it's so practical, functional, unique, it's not that crazy in the end. You know, as long as you have the space for it, and you have the decor, like, yeah, it works.
The man behind the revolutionary idea is funeral home renegade Mark Zeben. He knew he was onto something when it occurred to him there was more than one way to use a casket that could be a cost-saving innovation.
If somebody comes into my shop and they ask me what I do, basically I tell them I'm a coffin builder, you know? Well, after we get over how weird I am, you know, it kind of starts to make sense pretty quick to people. I'm used to building nice furniture where people, when they come to me, they're very happy and they thank me, you know, and now I get into coffins and every time I sell one, people are crying, and the next thing that happens is you bury it and never see it again, so you're spending, you know, $1,000, $2,000 on a casket, and all of a sudden you gotta bury it and you use it for one day. There had to be even a better way than that. Why use a coffin for just one day? That's basically what this is all about. Use it for a lifetime, and then it's about the only thing that you could take with you.
I like that. I like casket furniture. I suppose the only problem would be if someone in the family wants the furniture, then they got to do something else with you.
That's a little weird, having a coffin in your house. To each their own, but I'll pass on having a coffin as my coffee table in my living room.
It all began when Mark moved into the neighborhood and set up shop right next door to Katie.
I heard some banging noises one morning, and I thought, oh, I wonder what's happening outside. And I look, and there's this young man putting up a sign, funeral consulting? Wow, how cool is that? Then I just asked him what he does. And so he told me he builds coffins. I says, wow, really?
Yeah, Katie happened to be my first casket furniture customer. I had my whole house filled right up with caskets. I think I had 13 pieces in there, everything from a casket mirror to display coffee tables, my casket sofa.
He had a curio cabinet and he had a telephone booth. It was just gorgeous stuff. And all of these things were coffins. Well, how exciting was that?
And I ended up selling her an upright display cabinet. It's such a commanding piece. You walk in and there's a 7-foot tall coffin standing, you know. It holds her doll collection and a few other knickknacks and mirrors. Every time I go visit Katie, I see my coffin standing there. It's pretty cool.
Some may wonder why anyone would want a coffin in their living room.
It's a functional piece of furniture. By the time you die, it's already paid for. It's a great conversation piece, and it's so practical. It's 2-in-1. You know, you pull out the shelves, and then I imagine we'd put some stuffing, make it softer, a couple pillows, put on the handles, and we're ready to go.
Using your furniture as a casket gives true meaning to using it until it's truly dead.
I think it's a great idea to have a dual functioning casket. Anytime you can have something that conveys a conversation to start about your death, I think it's great. I think it's good for the industry and it's good for the people that are talking about funerals and final wishes.
Mark's new business is catching on like wildfire. Goths, self-proclaimed vampires, and celebrity customers want the caskets.
We have a lot of different lines of product. The casket furniture is the strange one, you know. It's what the media likes. It's kind of the weird one. It gets a lot of good and bad attention. But we do pet caskets, we do pet urns, we do human, regular caskets, human urns. We do casket plans. Maybe you're gonna wanna build the casket yourself. I could just sell you our plan. Maybe you wanna build the casket but don't have a workshop. I could sell you the pieces. We call them casket kits. I wanna make this as easy as possible for people in any funeral experience, you know? How much you wanna put into it, how much personality you wanna give it.
Katie couldn't be more pleased with her versatile furniture.
I love my last resting place. I love it because I chose it. And really, I'm gonna be one of the few that will have a designer casket, you know? Don't you think it's wonderful?
Others use their last wishes to try and capture proof of the eternal soul. When American copper miner and prospector James Kidd disappeared in 1949, it led to the discovery of his astounding will. Kidd was somewhat of a mystery man. He vanished after a prospecting trip in the area of the Superstition Mountains.
About a month after he went missing, In December of 1954, James Kidd was officially listed as missing. And it wasn't until 3 years later, in 1957, that they finally opened up his unclaimed safety deposit box, and the fun really started.
In January 1964, official examination of Kidd's papers disclosed assets totaling $174,065.69, a huge sum for the time.
The beautiful thing about this will is what he wanted his money to be used for, and it was to search for scientific evidence, photographic if possible, of the human soul leaving the body at the moment of death. I mean, that's weird.
The discovery of his will, giving nearly $250,000 to finding scientific proof of a soul, set off a frenzy. As a result, there ensued what newspapers called the ghost trial of the century.
Initially, I believe there were something like 500 letters that were sent to the court in the first month. Some people were saying that he was actually appearing in their house and telling them, they should go and get the money, and his spirit wanted them to go and do this. And initially, it looked like the money was going to be given to a neuropsychiatric institute in Arizona. But it was appealed because it became clear that they weren't really interested in the question of, life after death and survival. James Kidd actually wanted there to be a scientific study of survival and of the soul. Some people approached it along the lines of, mediumistic psychic phenomena, but there were other people who were in fact looking at the question of survival within a scientific framework.
In the end, the ASPR convinced the committee they were the best equipped to fulfill James Kidd's final wishes and were awarded the largest portion of his considerable estate.
The American Society for Psychical Research is the oldest psychical research organization in the United States. It was founded in 1885 by William James, the professor of psychology, the doctor from Harvard University, to use the tools of science to investigate claims of the paranormal. And one of those claims is the question of, is there life after death? Can that be studied? Can that be studied scientifically? Dr. James didn't necessarily believe that survival could be proved, but he did believe that certain extraordinary abilities like telepathy and ESP and perception at a distance, and the fact that there's something more than what we view as normal waking and sleeping consciousness, that there's another level of consciousness where we can communicate information at distances.
Upon receiving the money, ASPR set out to work immediately to find proof of psychic activity such as consciousness that can exist outside the physical realm.
When this was awarded to the ASPR, we didn't necessarily take photographs. We looked at research that we could do to look at extended perception. We know under the most controlled conditions that people can indeed extend their consciousness beyond the scope of the normal physical body. And we can say that James Kidd helped to fund all of this research that grew from that by putting in that question, by saying, well, what survives? And that was the answer to it. Well, maybe consciousness survives. So let's look at what consciousness can do. What that's telling us is that we're more than just here. Our consciousness can move across space and time.
They haven't yet been able to photograph the human soul, but understanding psychic phenomena is bringing them closer to what they believe might be the ultimate proof. James Kidd's legacy lives on in the search.
I think we're all looking for proof of life after death. And just to believe it happens and not see it, that's not good enough for us. Humans want to know.
I feel that the person was trying to leave the ultimate gift, that you can actually see souls living. In this case, unfortunately with Mr. Kidd, if in fact he proves to be correct, and they do in fact get the evidence that he was seeking desperately, the satisfaction is lost upon his death.
We live inside forces that are indeed affecting us all the time. And in spite of whether or not we understand them, we still live within them. It's interesting when people like James Kidd have the courage to say, okay, well, I want to ask the questions that may or may not be easy to answer and may or may not be answerable in my lifetime. But that doesn't mean we don't ask the questions, and that doesn't mean that we don't try and bring serious attention down to bear on these questions.
With people catching on to do-it-yourself caskets and bizarre new cost-cutting innovations, it would seem that the only certainty is the funeral ceremony itself.
There'll always be funerals because religion is actually a major part of a funeral. And that part I do not think will go away, no matter how one chooses to go away.
The exception may become the rule as people continue to break all the conventions in the funeral handbook.
The funeral rites that we have nowadays with the casket and the burial underground and now the cremation, I mean, that's been around for centuries and centuries. But it is possible that in the future that this changes and that we look at a brand new form of funerals.
With each new outrageous option that is explored, death becomes just a little less taboo.
I think anytime family members do unique things during the funeral process is a way for them to deal with their grief. I'm passionate about giving people what they want. Technologies are there, people are smart, we're gonna be able to do things differently than we've ever done before.